so when we look the next 5-10 years, we think there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity underneath the hood of parts of the market, such as cannabis. All right, folks, it's Serge Berger here, and I have Marc along with me, and we're going to talk a little bit about a topic that we think not only has been quite attention-grabbing in terms of the headlines over the past, well, it's been years actually, but particularly for the past few weeks and past few months, it's gotten more and more in the headlines again, and that has to do with the cannabis industry. And so, Marc, I think, one of the first thing, there's a couple of pillars here why we think there's so much growth, but one of the things that, just from a simple sort of cyclical perspective, if you look like at a new industry, whatever that is, whether that's an emerging industry like cryptocurrencies, or in this case we're looking at cannabis, you usually have like an initial rally where all the speculative stuff comes in, then it kind of falls apart, and then you start to see the second wave where the real money comes in. And when I look at, this is just the simple optics of an ETF that sort of tracks some of these cannabis stocks, I see something similar happening here that has already, I think, happened in particularly Bitcoin. What do you think about that?
Right. No, look, I fully agree. I think the main driving force going forward is a tremendous regulatory change. I think to a certain degree, the federal government in the U.S. is coming to terms with the fact that the war on drugs hasn't really succeeded, and perhaps legalizing cannabis at a federal level is probably just the beginning. So from a structural perspective, this theme is definitely going to take off.
Yeah, so, and I always try to keep politics out of this. I think it's just purely from a growth perspective, right? So I guess that's one thing. And if you just quickly sort of juxtapose this to another growth industry where at least we think there's some future in Bitcoin, similar kind of thing is not as clean on the other chart, but I'm just trying to give people visual. So the optics tend to make them understand things a bit quicker. We had that same move in Bitcoin, rally, fall apart. Whatever it was, 70-80%, whatever the drop was, and now we're here. And you look at what's happening in this space, and there's different. These are not perfect ETFs. There's a whole bunch more, and we're looking at a lot of detail here. But to your point, speaking of what could be some of the drivers that really catapults growth going forward. And
sorry. What's interesting with the cannabis industry is you think of the days of prohibition, the demand side of the equation has been established for decades and decades, right? So it's that's what's unique about the story, is that the demand side is always been there. It's the supply side and how that's met that's changing, and that's what's going to propel this entire industry going forward. If you take something like Bitcoin was something completely new. The demand side had to be created, right? And that's what we're starting to see change. So while there are two themes that have parallels, the cannabis story, demand is already there. It's always existed. What's changing is a supply side. Bitcoin, it's a demand side that's changing.
Yep.
And that's what's going to lead to, I mean, the way I see it is explosive growth.
I think so too. And just quickly touching back on the point before of regulation or really deregulation. It's just I'm just going to quickly bring up like marketwatch.com as a simple headline just to kind of tell people. I mean, basically what you've had here very recently, the past few days, is the Democrats starting to talk about actually working on actual legislation to make the cannabis industry legal on a federal level. And for those people that are not so sort of well versed yet in this space, what's really interesting about the cannabis space, the way we see it, is that there's really asymmetric risk, and I'd be interested to hear your take on it. Really, there's a couple of pillars. You have the the end of the prohibition, if you will, right? And how that sets up both in terms of bringing a lot more tax money. Think of all the transactions that happened over the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it's been, that
Right.
now is actually going to be, or all the transactions are now taxable, right? Helping out governments, local governments, state governments, from a tax revenue perspective, as they've lost a lot of tax revenue.
Right. That's the irony, right? Is that for decades they've been using tax money to fight to fight the war on drugs, and now they're reverse engineering this, and they're going to be net receivers. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean it's like there's two tailwinds, right? Just from that perspective, you're going from an industry that used to cost money,
Right.
but the government, which is what you're saying, to an industry that's going to bring in tax revenue. On top of that, you could talk about more the humane side of it, if you want to call it that, of less incarnation, less sort of decriminalization, or more decriminalization of the whole sort of cannabis trade as it becomes an actual business.
Right.
So that part is interesting, and I think I'm not sure whether that's the part that people struggle with yet, or is it the other aspect of what actually the medicinal uses of cannabinoids, right? You look at what are some of the things that, when people think about this, the first thought is, well, okay, well, that means I can start buying weed at the drugstore. Like, you literally go to Walgreens or whatever it is, and that's not really the point. There's a
Right.
massive industry there to do the whole medical thing, right? The whole.
Yeah.
I've just told one of my colleagues the other day, over Christmas, I just was we sort of within the limits of COVID, mingled with good friends of ours, and one of the person had been taking this it was like an oil, I think, a cannabis oil, cannabinoid oil,
Hmm.
and for her knee problems, and it literally has gone away, but just applying it for like a couple of weeks or something.
Right.
You know, and if you take into account an aging population, to some extent, there's the millennials and younger, there is quite a driver there to more sort of natural healing kind of things. It's really amazing what the tailwinds really could be, and actually are.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think just this week, right? The acquisition of GW Pharma by Jazz, is also an indication of how things are going to speed up in the space. And it's something you and I discussed just earlier today. So yeah, we can expect a lot more merger activity and consolidation as
Yeah.
well.
Well, and think about, like if you look at, like in a simple example, I know we talked about it before off camera, is, you look at something like Constellation Brands, which a lot of people know for their, beer and wine holdings. It's a company that
Hmm.
owns about 30% or so of of a more cannabis-oriented company called Canopy Growth. CGC is the ticker
Hmm.
symbol there. So STZ, I'm just going to bring up some tickers just to kind of reference these things. This is
Yeah.
STZ. This company owns about 30% or so
Hmm.
of CGC. And don't quote me on the exact numbers, but I thought that was the last count. So the question is, if Jazz Pharmaceuticals buys GW Pharma, which has now happened, and we were taken out of the stock at 220, which is
Hmm.
nice. There's speculation, by the way, that it could go higher as potentially another bidder comes in, but to me that was good enough. Um,
Yeah.
is a company like STC now going to buy the rest of Canopy Growth? And this would be an obvious one, right? There's so many underneath
Right.
the radar. Um,
Yeah.
so really, really interesting. And then the other thought I had for you was, if you look at the broader equity market, it really doesn't even matter whether it's largely a U.S. focused thing where we've seen just tremendous capitalization weights. And just a few names, we all know the names, the Apples of the world, the
Hmm.
Microsofts that are, a huge chunk, relatively speaking, of just of indices like the S&P and the Nasdaq 100. When we look at the forward performance of the next 5 to 10 years, I mean, it is my base case, and I'd love to hear your take. That we're going to see less performance, like less gamma, if you will.
Right. No, I fully agree. I mean, you just reach you reach a market cap on some of these stocks where the growth going forward, for them to justify that kind of multiple and growth going forward, it becomes increasingly more difficult for them to find new products or markets to enter that are of that size and that will help meet that growth. It's just the equation doesn't balance.
Right.
And it's not surprising to see Apple, start talking about producing electric cars, and it's, how many $1 trillion markets are there out there for them? So it's,
Well, cars is a good attempt, I guess, in that sense.
yeah,
But
right. But you take a Tesla, for instance, the valuation is what it is, but the actual profit margins, the net profit margins are extremely low. So you've got this insane multiple. Well, you've got this very high multiple on an underlying business where the net margins are nowhere near the net margins that Apple generates on its existing business. So it's
you're gonna have decreasing margins, and that's also why there's a decreasing rate of change in the stock. But I think that's also kind of my thinking. So like one of the things you and I are always talking about, and we'll be soon enough releasing some of this research to the Lens of newsletter. Look at the next 5 to 10 years, and the world evolves really quicker every day, every week. Just the indexing game, I think that's really one that has, in my opinion, kind of reached its peak. The passive investing, which for most people is a great thing to do, but what people forget about that is that you can have a 10-year period of time, and 10 years is a long time for a lot of people, where you have very little to no performance on an equity index. And so when we look the next 5-10 years, we think there's just tremendous amount of opportunity underneath the hood of parts of the market, such as cannabis and various other pockets. We'll make more videos on this.
I think that's the key point, right? Is we need to find areas that represent the future of growth. And it's not going to be, it's just not going to be in the mega cap tech stocks. Just because the math doesn't work out that way.
And that's not to speak badly against those companies. It's just
not at all.
It's just and they'll continue to be there and generate nice profits and stuff, and but I think if we dig below the surface and you look at something like where I think you and I both agree, there's essentially asymmetric risk, in something like cannabis, meaning the downside is kind of limited. With just unlimited upside, basically. And in some of the other companies we just talked about, there may be quite the opposite, to a degree, right?
Right. No, I fully agree. The caveat to all of this is, these high growth long-term themes are volatile. So you have to weather that volatility and accept it. But anyone who's been in Tesla knows what that feels like.
Comes down to sort of a portfolio allocation. I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you want to do is always combine different growth themes that are going to have different catalysts at different times. Mm-hmm. And that's where you're going to get your decorrelated returns and your sort of quasi hedge portfolio.
Yeah. Well, it's very exciting, and I think we couldn't be in a better spot to kind of take this on a bit more. It's like we said before, the way we started the quick chat here is by looking at sort of the general sort of waves within which an industry develops. Again, you have the initial one, the highly speculative phase, and it washes everyone out, and then you get the real phase. And I think we've literally just begun this real phase in many industries, cannabis being one of them. I personally think Bitcoin's in a similar space, but there's 5-10 other industries or parts of the market that we see doing the same, and we'll keep people in tune on that. Again, we're going to come out with an official newsletter on this soon. But I guess this is as good a spot as any to kind of wrap this up. And thanks for the chat. And
thank you,
folks. If you enjoyed this, give us a sort of a comment or a thumbs up like, and watch out for the next one. We're going to take out another industry that we think has a lot of growth. I'll see you soon.